Good morning. My name is Denise Williams. I'm the CEO of the First Nations Technology Council, and I am honored to share a virtual space with you here today to talk about co-creating our digital and connected future, a call to action from the First Nations Technology Council. I come from the Cowichan tribes, that's on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada. And as an Indigenous woman, I am pleased to share a vision for a more equitable future for all Indigenous peoples in our digitally and connected present and future. Before getting started, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh peoples here today. And I'd also like to acknowledge the Indigenous lands on which participants of the International Regulators Forum may be on in the work that they do. To start, please allow me to share a bit about who we are. We are an Indigenous-led, not-for-profit, working towards equitable access to technology for Indigenous communities in order to advance sovereignty in the digital age. Our mandates come from the First Nations Leadership Council in British Columbia, and they have asked us to do 4 things. Number 1, ensure all our people have the digital skills to succeed in a digitally connected world. Number 2, to ensure all our people have the access to equal and affordable technologies. Number 3, that we are promoting and enabling integrated information management systems that lead to thriving sovereign Indigenous communities. And number 4, that all peoples have access to services and supports appropriate for our people. So how we translate that into our vision and mission as an organization is to succeed in all Indigenous peoples having access to high-speed, affordable, and sustainable connectivity, that all Indigenous peoples have access to the education and skill set required to participate in the digital and connected economy, Indigenous peoples leading the research, data, analysis, and planning forward for the integration of technology into their lives, and Indigenous wisdom present at the leadership tables that is going to determine what the future of humanity looks like in a digital and connected age. So here's what we're doing about this. At the First Nations Technology Council, we're drafting Canada's first Indigenous framework for innovation and technology. We're leading BC's first Indigenous sector labor market study in the technology and innovation space. We're compiling connectivity data and leading discussions on how to co-create a more equitable Canada. And we're offering digital skills programming to over 3,000 Indigenous peoples in British Columbia that have been designed for and by Indigenous peoples. So I'd love just to take a moment to tell you more about this last point. Foundations and Futures in Innovation and Technology is one of our most successful programs released to date. It's an introductory program to 6 digital skills areas connected to the outcomes of the provincial labor market study on the growth of the tech sector. It's comprised of 12 weeks with monthly start dates, all of which now are virtual. And we've succeeded in getting it accredited by Nicola Valley Institute of Technology. So our graduates now receive 24 post-secondary credits, which is huge because entrance is a huge barrier for Indigenous students, especially as our program doesn't require grade 12. This makes this program extremely accessible. And so Foundations is our entry point for anyone interested in the tech sector but wanting to explore how their skills might match up. The Futures program deepens skills and prepares participants for working in the sector or to grow local digital economies in their nations. We have a deep and meaningful partnership with 46 industry partners to achieve the beginning of transforming Canada's tech sector, to achieve excellence in including Indigenous peoples and lifting up the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In total, like I say, we've had over 3,000 Indigenous students through our programming with an astonishing 90 to 95% retention rate. We've got 25 instructors active in the field to localize and contextualize the material, which is key to our philosophy of care and education. So at its heart, students learn computer basics and best practices, communication and digital marketing, network setup and support, web development and coding, software testing, GIS and GPS mapping, and then they go on to be our exemplars of excellence in Indigenous-led technology and innovation. They're the next generation, and they are our future. We've worked exceptionally hard to understand the pathways appropriate for our learners. No one program can resolve generations of both exclusion from the economy and society. And no one program can move Indigenous students to trust the education system after the residential schools trauma many of us live with today, myself included. My personal commitment is to ensure this generation has every opportunity to know and celebrate their ancestry, identity, and belonging on their traditional territories. I believe that establishing our sovereignty and voice in a digital and virtual space is one of our most important endeavors, not only today, but to serve future generations. This pathway and program is in place not only to share wisdom and vision in a circular way with our participants, but to also decolonize and to heal. We've taken special care to match the deep personal work that we embark on with very tangible outcomes in terms of the skills and abilities our graduates will receive. Our graduates are finding their way to job opportunities in which they are often the first to have as Indigenous peoples or in their families or in our programs. These are true trailblazers. Our success is so new that we don't even know where someone will go with their skills. And this emergent nature of how Indigenous peoples will transform the sector and their communities is incredible to witness in its unfolding. And we don't do this without elders. It's really important to mention. This is Elder Glida. She opens our circles, she shares wisdom, and grounds our participants and staff in Indigenous teachings and ways of knowing, being, and seeing. Our belief is that all generations, voices, and ideas are welcome and needed in the circle for true learning, the kind that transforms you and stays with you for all of your life lessons to take place. Because we know our graduates are entering a sector where they represent less than 1% of the workforce, to change that, not only does the tech sector have to learn and grow in the ability to respectfully welcome Indigenous peoples into our organizations, but to also understand how to unlock the incredible potential of the young minds that carry with them not only the ability to technically design the future, but whom also hold ancestral knowledge of how to do this in an ethically balanced and ecosystem conscious way. So this isn't just about mentorship, eldership, or being resilient in the tech sector. This is about intergenerational reclamation of leadership and stewardship of our physical and now virtual world. And if that wasn't ambitious enough, we now are trying to do all of this in the complexity that is 2020. We are working through how to offer our programming when fewer than 10% of First Nations people in BC have access to the internet at home. We are fighting to improve connectivity, but without funds, support, or any real way to solve the affordability issue that is very real for all Canadians, we are struggling. And we do all this while we watch our entire society move online, leaving behind over 250,000 Indigenous people in just BC alone. Our Learn From Home campaign has done extraordinarily well, as you can see on the left, but we are conscious of the vast number of people that can't join us. And it's those that live in their community and those that likely need us the most. So here's some basic data about where we stand. These figures are from 2018, but honestly, not a lot has changed. My interpretation of this is that our market-driven model in the telecommunications space forces communities to make ROI arguments that are impossible to achieve by most rural Canadians, are so out of reach, and even more so out of reach for Indigenous communities. We see some significant resources going into connecting Canadians, the kinds of initiatives that are so well resourced, but are not including Indigenous people in the design, implementation, or evaluation of the initiatives. So we tend to be completely left out of the equation and sit on the sidelines knowing that a market-driven model with no competition or strong regulation will never achieve equity. And here's why that's frustrating. The health and wellness of our people and all Canadians is built upon our access to broadband technology and our ability to build our lives and nations upon it. Access to technology is a super determinant to population wellness and success. And this is why I agree with it being a basic human right and a basic utility. So having to raise millions of dollars as a small community to gain access, or to ask Indigenous peoples who have been economically disabled in Canada for over 100 years, and because of the Indian Act, just doesn't make any sense. As we map and correlate these inputs and these outputs, I wonder sometimes why it's necessary for our communities to make this argument, when if we had money and Western forms of power and influence, this argument wouldn't be necessary at all. So I believe it is the job of all of us here today to find a better way through, to learn from each other, and to imagine a system not built on capitalism, exclusion, and bias. We're capable of this intellectually, but we have to find the will. At the First Nations Technology Council, our contribution to this better future is the framework for innovation and technology. IFIT is a roadmap for Indigenous communities, the BC and federal governments, and the tech ecosystem to coordinate actions to ensure digital equity and technological advancement across the province. For our side of the equation, this framework will achieve a unified vision for our technologically enabled future and help us to realize self-determination, Indigenous community well-being, integrated access to services, Indigenous innovation and leadership, Indigenous inclusion in the digital economy, and of course, reconciliation. The challenges and barriers that prevent digital equity and economic reconciliation are systemic, complex, and intertwined. Further, the interjurisdictional overlap between the provincial and federal government has left many communities to fend for themselves when it comes to connectivity and technological advancement, without a clear path or collective plan to create an economy of scale. The Government of Canada and BC have committed to building a nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples. However, a true nation-to-nation relationship requires both sides to have the resources and capacity to operate as a nation in a modern context. The Technology Council has heard directly from Indigenous peoples in all regions of BC that inequitable access to digital and connected technologies is one of the biggest barriers to a community's economic growth and self-determination. Whether it's application development for language and culture revitalization, GIS, GPS, and drone technologies for territory stewardship, or integrated technology solutions for band administration, technology underpins every aspect of nation building in a modern world. There is currently no overarching framework to monitor the advancement of digital equity or economic reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. There's an urgent need for such an overarching plan, which we've termed the Indigenous Framework for Innovation and Technology, in order to achieve digital equity and economic reconciliation in BC. The Technology Council has identified 6 areas of immediate intervention required to ensure that Indigenous communities in BC have the information technology infrastructure and capacity needed for full participation and leadership in our increasingly digital economy. So IFIT will provide a much needed blueprint to coordinate, leverage, synthesize actions and opportunities to ensure Indigenous peoples are full participants in the digital economy and are using technology to advance self-determination. So the areas of intervention include the following: connectivity and infrastructure, policy and legislation, skills development, employment and business development, tech and innovation leadership, and governance and self-determination. So this plan focuses on the need for connectivity and infrastructure as a foundational element to begin to achieve digital equity. Digital equity is a condition in which all individuals and communities have the technology capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. Digital equity is necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning, and access to essential services. So the impact of COVID-19 has heightened the awareness around the disparity that currently exists between many Canadian communities and First Nations communities when it comes to digital access, and underscores the fact that connectivity is a necessity of life in the 21st century. Economic reconciliation is the creation of meaningful partnerships and mutually beneficial opportunities between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples based on a holistic, values-driven approach to attaining community economic prosperity. This simply cannot be achieved without access to the internet and digital technologies. The advancement of technology is required to ensure that all Indigenous communities have the infrastructure to meet basic broadband standard. Here in Canada, 50 megabits download speeds, 10 megabit upload speeds. The capacity of communities to adapt to digital disruption is essential to successfully transitioning to the innovation economy. And the empowerment of individual community members to pursue the skills and jobs brought on by technology is essential to achieving socioeconomic parity between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples as well. So IFIT aims to pull levers that will position Indigenous communities to fully utilize technology and innovation to advance their rights as outlined in the principles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the new UNDRIP legislation in British Columbia. As technology becomes increasingly pervasive throughout all aspects of our lives, especially during this time of social distancing and community isolation, there is a great risk that Indigenous peoples will be further excluded from economic opportunities unless immediate interventions are taken to achieve digital equity. So this is the reality of our time. There is no coordinated approach, which is leading to massive impacts on Indigenous peoples and on future generations. There's no funding or support for the First Nations Technology Council or organizations like ours in the not-for-profit space that are coordinating these efforts. So the reality is this work might not go on. The First Nations Technology Council might not survive past 2021. We must take this opportunity to think differently about our future and who's designing it, and we must take action. So here's a few ways you can support if you're feeling inspired, if you're feeling called to this. Please share what you've learned here. One of the biggest challenges for us as Indigenous people is that a lot of people don't understand the story or the data, and we remain invisible. So please share what you've learned. Connect with us on potential opportunities. You can visit our website. You can see our call for donations and support. And please include Indigenous peoples in decision-making, in design, in evaluation, and please be an ally. And again, if you'd like to reach me, my email is here. All of our social media handles are here if you'd like to follow our work on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis. And thank you so much for your time and sharing space and being open to having your mind maybe changed. I'm sending you and your family my best and continued wellness during this turbulent time. Aichka Osim.